The boardroom fell silent as Marcus Thompson's pen clicked against a mahogany table, each tap echoing like a countdown to disaster. His steel-gray eyes fixed on the clock above the conference room door, 9:47 a.m. Daniel Rivera was late again, and this time there would be consequences. Marcus had built Pinnacle Industries from nothing, clawing his way up through sheer determination, and an iron will that never bent for anyone. Punctuality wasn't just expected, it was sacred. In his world, being late meant you didn't respect the company, didn't respect success, and certainly didn't respect him. The conference room door burst open, and Daniel stumbled in, his usually pressed shirt wrinkled, his dark hair disheveled, and his breathing labored as if he'd sprinted up 12 flights of stairs. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the November chill that had followed him inside. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and tell us about a time you were unfairly judged. Your story might inspire someone else today. Mr. Rivera, Marcus's voice cut through the air like a blade. This is the 4th time this month. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he set his briefcase down, his coffee-stained fingers fumbling with the handle. Sir, I can explain. Explanations are for people who make mistakes once. Marcus stood slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the polished table, where the other executives sat in uncomfortable silence. This is a pattern, and patterns reveal character. The truth was, Daniel Rivera was brilliant. His marketing campaigns had increased Pinnacle's revenue by 37% over the past year. His innovative strategies had landed them contracts worth millions. But Marcus Thompson didn't deal in exceptions, and he certainly didn't tolerate weakness. Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Marcus caught something in the younger man's eyes, not defiance, but desperation. Raw, unfiltered desperation that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible choices. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the composed mask Daniel always wore at work. "Pack your desk," Marcus continued, his voice steady and final. "Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck will be mailed." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's face went pale, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. He simply nodded once, gathered his briefcase, and walked toward the door with the careful dignity of a man trying not to collapse. As the door closed behind Daniel, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of decisive leadership. He'd built an empire by making tough choices, and sentiment had no place in the boardroom. The other executives exchanged glances but said nothing. They all knew better than to question Marcus Thompson's decisions. What Marcus didn't know was that Daniel's hands were shaking not from fear, but from exhaustion. He'd been awake since 3 a.m., not reviewing presentations or preparing pitches, but sitting in a hospital waiting room, holding his 8-year-old daughter Sophia's hand as she underwent another round of emergency treatment. If you ever felt like the universe was testing your limits, hit subscribe now. Sometimes our greatest challenges lead to our most beautiful transformations. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in his corner office, watching the city sprawl beneath him through floor-to-ceiling windows. Pinnacle Industries was thriving, but something nagged at him, a persistent whisper that he'd made the right decision for the wrong reasons. His assistant, Janet, knocked and entered with a stack of papers. "The Rivera replacement isn't working out," she said quietly, setting the documents on his desk. "The Henderson campaign failed, and we lost the Morrison account." Marcus frowned. Daniel's replacement, a Harvard graduate with impeccable credentials and an even more impressive punctuality record, had seemed perfect on paper. "Give me someone better." "Sir," Janet hesitated. "Maybe we were too hasty." Daniel Rivera was unreliable. Marcus cut her off. "I don't make mistakes, Janet." But that evening, as Marcus drove to the older part of town on his way to an investor dinner, fate decided to intervene. His BMW broke down at a red light, steam rising from under the hood like a surrender flag. Cursing under his breath, he pulled into the nearest parking lot, a small diner called Sophia's Kitchen, wedged between a laundromat and a pharmacy. The neon sign flickered weakly in the growing dusk, and to the smudged windows, Marcus could see families gathered around mismatched tables, their laughter spilling into the street. It was everything his world wasn't warm, chaotic, imperfect, and somehow more real than the sterile luxury he was accustomed to. While waiting for roadside assistance, he decided to get coffee. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the aroma of homemade soup and fresh bread enveloped him like a forgotten memory. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, her graying hair pulled back in practical bun, her apron stained with evidence of hard work. "What can I get you, honey?" she asked with a smile that reminded Marcus of his grandmother, the one person who'd never been impressed by his success or intimidated by his power. "Just coffee, Black," he replied, his usual commanding tone softening automatically in the face of her genuine warmth. As she poured his coffee, Marcus noticed a small shrine in the corner. Photos of a young girl with bright eyes and an infectious grin, surrounded by get-well cards and small toys. The nameplate read, Sofia Rivera, and Marcus's blood turned cold. Comment justice. If you believe everything happens for a reason, what Marcus discovers next will change everything. "Beautiful little girl," he found himself saying, nodding toward the photos. The woman's face lit up and crumpled simultaneously. "That's my granddaughter, Sophia. She's been fighting leukemia for 2 years now. Strongest little warrior you ever saw." She wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. Her daddy works 3 jobs trying to keep up with the medical bills. Well, worked 3 jobs. Just got fired from his main one for being late too many times. The coffee cup slipped from Marcus's fingers, shattering on the floor in an explosion of ceramic and dark liquid. The woman rushed around the counter with a towel, but Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he'd just learned. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked, her concern genuine despite the mess. "Daniel Rivera," Marcus whispered. "Is he your son?" She looked up sharply. "You know my Danny? How do you—" Recognition dawned on her weathered features. "You're him, aren't you? You're the boss who fired my son." The diner seemed to spin around Marcus as memories crashed over him like a tsunami. Every late morning, every hurried excuse, every time Daniel had looked exhausted and distracted, it all made horrible, perfect sense. While Marcus had been judging Daniel's character, the man had been fighting for his daughter's life. "I need to see him," Marcus said suddenly, his voice barely audible. Sophia's grandmother, Maria, he learned, studied his face for a long moment. "He's at the hospital now, room 314. But if you're going there to cause more trouble—" "No!" Marcus interrupted, his throat tight with emotions he hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to fix this." St. Mary's Hospital smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, its fluorescent lights casting everything in harsh, unforgiving relief. Marcus had never felt smaller than he did walking those endless corridors, his expensive shoes squeaking against the polished floors with each step toward room 314. Before we continue, if you've ever realized you were completely wrong about someone, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our greatest lessons. Through the small window in the door, Marcus saw Daniel slumped in a chair beside a small hospital bed. His strong shoulders were shaking with silent sobs, and his hands covered his face as if trying to hold himself together through sheer force of will. In the bed lay Sophia, tinier than in the photos, her dark hair gone from chemotherapy, but her eyes still bright with the kind of fierce spirit that reminded Marcus of her father. She was awake, and she was trying to comfort Daniel. Her small hand patted his arm while she whispered something Marcus couldn't hear through the glass. The sight of this 8-year-old girl consoling her broken father while fighting for her own life shattered something inside Marcus that he hadn't even realized was still whole. He knocked softly, and Daniel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed in full confusion when he saw Marcus standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither man spoke. The weight of everything unsaid hung between them, like a bridge that had burned on both ends. "Mr. Thompson?" Daniel's voice was hoarse from exhaustion and grief. "What are you doing here?" Marcus stepped into the room, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. He felt like an imposter in his expensive suit, surrounded by the raw reality of love and loss that money couldn't touch. "I met your mother at the diner. She told me about Sophia." Daniel's face hardened, protective instincts flaring even in his exhausted state. "If you came here to—" "I came here to apologize," Marcus said quickly, the words tumbling out before his pride could stop them. I came here because I've been an idiot and a fool, and probably the worst kind of human being imaginable. Sophia stirred in her bed, her bright eyes focusing on Marcus with curious intensity. Daddy, who's a sad man? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, this child could see right through his expensive armor to the hollow man beneath. Daniel smoothed Sophia's thin blanket with gentle hands, his voice soft when he spoke to her. This is Mr. Thompson, Mija. He was my boss. Oh, Sophia said solemnly. Are you here to give Daddy his job back? He's really good at his job, you know? He makes pretty pictures on the computer that make people want to buy things. Marcus felt his throat close up completely. This child was facing the fight of her life, and she was worried about her father's employment. The pure selflessness of it, the simple love in her voice when she defended Daniel, cut Marcus deeper than any business failure ever could. Share this with someone who needs to remember that kindness matters more than profit. What happens next will restore your faith in humanity. Sophia, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly as he knelt beside her bed. Your daddy is the best employee I ever had, and I was too stupid to see it. Over the next hour, Daniel told Marcus everything. The sleepless nights when Sophia couldn't stop vomiting from chemotherapy. The morning rushes to emergency rooms when her fever spiked. The impossible choice between keeping a job and being present for his daughter's treatment. The 3 other part-time jobs he'd taken to cover medical bills that insurance wouldn't touch. The way he'd practice his presentations in hospital waiting rooms. Tried to maintain his professional edge while watching his little girl suffer. I never wanted special treatment, Daniel said quietly, his eyes fixed on Sophia, who had fallen asleep holding a worn stuffed elephant. I just needed understanding, but I know that's not how business works. Marcus stared at this man who had somehow managed to excel at work, while carrying a burden that would have crushed most people. Daniel had never complained, never asked for accommodations, never used his personal tragedy as an excuse. He had simply endured, and somehow still found the strength to create brilliant campaigns that drove pinnacle success. It's how my business works now, Marcus said firmly. If you'll let me. The conversation that followed changed everything. Marcus learned about the experimental treatment that could save Sophia's life. A procedure available at a specialized clinic in Boston that cost more than Daniel could ever hope to raise. He learned about the fundraising events at Sophia's kitchen, where the community had rallied around this family with the fierce loyalty that only small-town America could muster. He learned about Daniel's ex-wife, who had abandoned them when Sophia's diagnosis became too much to handle, leaving Daniel to face this nightmare alone. Most importantly, Marcus learned about strength, real strength, the kind that doesn't come from corporate power or financial success, but from love so pure and fierce that it transforms ordinary people into heroes. Before Marcus left that night, he made 3 phone calls. The first was to his assistant, authorizing Daniel's immediate reinstatement with a significant promotion and raise. The second was to his lawyer, arranging for Pinnacle Industries to cover all of Sophia's medical expenses, including the experimental treatment in Boston. The third was to his personal assistant, clearing his calendar for the next week. Comment transformation. If you believe people can change, the most powerful moment is about to unfold. 2 months later, Marcus stood in the same hospital, but everything had changed. Sophia was in remission, her hair starting to grow back in soft, dark curls that framed her face like a halo. She was sitting up in bed, showing Marcus the drawing she'd made of him, a stick figure in a tie with an enormous smile, and the words, Sophia's friend, written in crayon across the bottom. I made this for you because you helped Daddy not be sad anymore, she explained with a matter-of-fact wisdom that only children possess. Daniel stood nearby, looking healthier than Marcus had ever seen him. The constant tension that had marked his features was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who no longer had to choose between his daughter's life and his livelihood. His work at Pinnacle had reached new heights of creativity and innovation, fueled by gratitude and the freedom to be fully present in both his professional and personal life. There's something else, Marcus said, pulling out an envelope. Pinnacle Industries is establishing the Sofia Rivera Foundation for families dealing with childhood cancer. We're starting with $1 million endowment, and Daniel is going to head it up alongside his marketing duties." Sophia clapped her hands together with delight, not fully understanding the implications, but sensing the joy in the room. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he took the envelope with trembling hands. "Marcus," he said softly, using his boss's first name for the first time ever, "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Marcus replied, and he meant it. "You showed me what real leadership looks like. It's not about demanding respect. It's about earning it. It's not about punishing people for their struggles. It's about helping them overcome them." As Marcus walked through the hospital corridors that day, nurses and doctors stopped him to shake his hand. Word had spread about the executive who had transformed from corporate tyrant to guardian angel, and the story had taken on a life of its own. But Marcus knew the real transformation was internal. The slow, painful, beautiful process of becoming the man he should have been all along. 6 months later, Pinnacle Industries was featured on the cover of Fortune magazine, not for its profits, but for its revolutionary approach to employee support and work-life balance. The company's productivity had increased by 60% as word spread that this was a place where humanity mattered more than quarterly reports. The best talent in the industry was beating down their doors, wanting to work for a company that understood that behind every employee was a complete human being with struggles, dreams, and people they loved. If you believe that success means lifting others up, not tearing them down, subscribe right now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Marcus's own life had changed in ways he never expected. He'd started volunteering at Sophia's kitchen every Sunday, serving meals and listening to the stories of families who were fighting battles he'd never imagined. He'd learned their names, their dreams, their fears. He'd discovered that real wealth wasn't measured in stock options or corner offices, but in the connections we make and the lives we touch. The day Sophia rang the bell at the hospital, signifying the end of her treatment and the beginning of her new life as a cancer survivor, Marcus was there. He stood with Daniel and Maria, with nurses who had become family, with neighbors who had prayed and fundraised and loved this little girl back to health. As the clear, bright sound of the bell echoed through the halls, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Sophia ran to him first, her new curls bouncing as she threw her arms around his waist. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered against his expensive suit jacket. But Marcus knew the truth. She had saved him. This 8-year-old warrior with her infectious laugh and unshakable spirit had shown him that success without compassion was just expensive emptiness. Daniel had saved him too, by never giving up, by continuing to create brilliance, even while his world was falling apart, by showing Marcus what real strength looked like. As they walked out of the hospital together, this unlikely family bound not by blood, but by the shared experience of almost losing everything and finding something better instead, Marcus thought about the man he used to be. That man would never understand this moment, would never comprehend how helping someone else could feel better than any deal he'd ever closed. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink as they reached the parking lot, and Sophia skipped ahead, her energy boundless now that she was free from the weight of illness. Daniel caught up with Marcus, his steps lighter than they'd been in years. "You know," Daniel said quietly, "I used to hate you, really, truly hate you." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "You had every right to. But now I realize you gave me something I never expected. You gave me the chance to discover that miracles are real, and that sometimes they come in the most unexpected packages." Marcus smiled, watching Sophia spin in circles under the open sky, her arms stretched wide as if trying to embrace the whole world. "She's going to change the world, your daughter." "She already has," Daniel replied. "She changed ours." As Marcus drove home that evening, he thought about the letter he'd received that morning from a single mother in his accounting department, asking for flexible hours to care for her disabled son. The old Marcus would have denied the request without a second thought. The new Marcus had approved it immediately and arranged for additional support services through the Sofia Rivera Foundation. Change, he'd learned, wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a series of small choices to be better, to do better, to see the humanity in every person who walked through his doors. It was choosing empathy over efficiency, understanding over authority, love over fear. Comment HOPE if this story reminded you that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become the person you were meant to be. Share this with someone who needs to remember that our greatest failures often lead to our most beautiful beginnings. The last image Marcus carried with him was of Sophia's smile as she rang that bell, bright, victorious, and full of the kind of hope that can only come from surviving the unsurvivable. It was the same hope he saw now in Daniel's eyes, in Maria's proud tears, in the faces of every employee who no longer feared their boss, but respected the man he'd become. Sometimes the universe doesn't give us what we want. Sometimes it gives us what we need. A child's courage, a father's love, and a humbling realization that our biggest mistakes can become our greatest teachers. Marcus Thompson had learned that real power isn't about controlling others. It's about empowering them. Real success isn't about climbing over people. It's about lifting them up. And real leadership isn't about demanding loyalty. It's about earning it through service to something bigger than yourself. In the end, a CEO's tears weren't a sign of weakness. They were a sign of finally, fully becoming human.